This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. What the hell is going on? Iran edition.
Yes, what the hell is going on is the liberation of Iran has begun. Donald Trump has launched Operation Epic Fury, which is an awesome name for an Oz operation, and we are pummeling the hell out of the Iranian regime. The Iranian, can always depend on your enemies to miscalculate. We almost never attack during daylight hours, and we had a list of Iranian targets that we were going to take out over a 4-week campaign, and we got a large fraction of them in one strike because these geniuses decided, let's have breakfast together and talk about things. And they all gathered in one place.
No one can resist a donut.
The deadliest donut in history, or whatever the Iranian pastry is. And they all gathered in one place, and there was a target of opportunity. We took out 48 of them, possibly 49 of the top leaders. So, I mean, you're talking about, we didn't just take out the leadership of the IRGC. We took out the leadership that would have succeeded the leadership of the IRGC and the leadership who would have succeeded them on top of everything else. So this is supposed to be a roughly 4-week military operation, and we are way ahead of schedule in terms of eliminating senior targets. And that doesn't mean there's not a lot left to do. As our guest points out, we really haven't started dismantling the nuclear program yet. We are focused on suppressing their ballistic missile capability. We're focused on suppressing their ability to retaliate. But every day that goes by, we take out more of that, and the danger of retaliation goes down. This is epic. Say what you will about Donald Trump. This is one of the most important foreign policy decisions any American president has made in the post-Cold War era, and one of the boldest and most consequential. And if this operation succeeds, Donald Trump is going to take his place as one of the most positively consequential American presidents. I mean, in a very rare, I said on Fox the other day, there have been 45 American presidents in the 250-year history of our country, and you can count on one hand the ones who really changed the world. Reagan bringing down communism, FDR defeating fascism. This will
George Washington.
Yep, George Washington.
Thomas Jefferson. Abraham Lincoln.
Yep. Donald Trump will legitimately, if this succeeds, Donald Trump will legitimately claim his place among that top echelon of American presidents who have transformed the world by their leadership and by their courage. This is if we just had the State of the Union address this week, and he brought out that helicopter pilot who carried out that amazing mission with details of which we didn't know about until that night, right? Flying a helicopter into Caracas, getting his legs blown out, still managing to land the helicopter and get it to its destination, getting Maduro. If that helicopter had crashed, that would have been his Desert One. If we imagine we had the helicopter crashed, we failed to get Maduro, Americans killed on the ground, and you're talking about Jimmy Carter, all over again. And this operation in Iran is far riskier than that, and far bigger than that. So the president has taken a very bold, courageous decision to carry out this operation. And there's still a lot can go wrong. It's not finished yet, but this is world changing in terms of what can be accomplished.
Right. So first of all, Mark, I do want to acknowledge that, like any military operation, this is not risk-free. We have lost three. We've lost 3 soldiers.
4.
We've lost four. Thank you. We've lost 4
soldiers. One of the ones who
soldiers.
was injured. Recording this on Monday morning. One of them has passed away.
Thank you for telling me. So we've lost 4. We've lost 4 troops. We had 3 planes shot down by our allies by mistake, by the Kuwaitis. And so, like anything we do, this is not cost-free, certainly not in treasure, but also not in blood. And we remember these things. On the other hand, I've got to say, I've liked other presidents more than I've liked Donald Trump in some ways, but I think it's very hard to argue that we have had a president in the last 25 years who would have made the bold decisions that he's made. And I think that's really, while again you describe it differently than I would, I think this decision on Iran is bold. And I think it's very important. And I don't want to. I want us to talk about the risks, but first of all, I want to talk about the imperative. People forget. What has Iran ever done to us? Well, let's start in 1979, and our hostages, and our CIA station chief, and 244 Marines a mere 4 years later in Beirut who were murdered by Iranian agents, our troops inside Iraq, Khobar Towers. We could go on and on and on. Iran has so much American
And
blood
October
on its
7th.
hands.
October 7th.
Right.
Dozens
How many
of
Americans were
killed.
murdered?
16, I think 16 were taken hostage by Hamas, by Iran's proxy. Yeah.
So exactly. So the idea that Iran has never done anything to us, not to speak of the fact they have tried to kill various presidents of ours. So the idea that
And
Iran
the
represents
Cafe Milano plot. They were going to blow up Cafe Milano in downtown Georgetown to kill the Saudi ambassador.
Yep, exactly. So that argument goes nowhere. The argument that Iran was contained, I think we address extremely well with our guest David Albright, talking about their nuclear, their missiles, and additional stuff. But then let us talk about
Before we pivot.
One sec. I want to add something that I think you'll appreciate. But then there are all of our friends on the center left who have been bitching and moaning and crying and gnashing their teeth repeatedly in the pages of The Atlantic and the New York Times and any other publication they can find about how Donald Trump won't do enough for their friends in Ukraine because he's such a tool of Putin. What about the fact that Iran has all that Ukrainian blood on its hands on top of everything else? Maybe you folks don't care about the Americans that Iran has killed, but what about the Ukrainians that Iran has helped Russia kill? That is probably one of Russia's most potent weapons is the Shahed drone that they are using to kill scores, hundreds, thousands of Ukrainian civilians, women, children. The idea that people who want us to act on Ukraine don't give a shit about Iran and the crimes that Iran has committed against us and innocent people everywhere drives me crazy. Sorry, that was my rant.
Go rant away, Danny. I'm with you. I do want to get into that, but I want to make one other point about the reign of terror that you and I sort of just laid out all together back and forth, the details of everything going back to 1979, the terrorist attacks, and both abroad and potentially at home that Iran has threatened us with. Critics on the right say, Donald Trump campaigned against forever wars. He's going to end the forever wars. Why is he starting a new one? He is ending a forever war because Iran has been engaged in a forever war against the United States, a 47-year forever war, and he has finally decided to decisively end that war by defeating our enemy. And that's what we're engaged in right now. So he is actually ending a forever war. And if you think about it, how many presidents have in one way or another since the end of the Cold War promised to pivot away from the Middle East and pivot to Asia? Focus on our hemisphere. Focus on the real threat that we face from communist China. Well, guess what? Why do we have so many troops and spend tens of billions of dollars on military deployments in the Middle East? Because of Iran. It's the primary reason we're there. If we defeat this regime and we replace it with, I'm not looking for a Jeffersonian democracy, though I would love that, but a regime that doesn't wake up every morning and say death to America, death to Israel, right? A regime that is focused on its own citizens and delivering for its own citizens as opposed to spreading terror across the world, then you know what? We've got to stay in the Middle East, obviously. We have interests in the region, but we can divert a lot of resources away from that region to Asia, which is why this is a huge setback for the Putin-Xi Jinping axis.
That's right.
If Iran goes, it frees up so many resources, so much attention that we can focus on them. and we can pivot away. So if you don't want us to, all these people have been saying, oh, we got to stop with these Middle East wars, we got to stop getting dragged into the Middle East. This is how we get out of the Middle East. This is how we can finally pivot to the Indo-Pacific. So, if you're against forever wars, you should be for what Donald Trump is doing right now.
Amen to that, Mark. I think that is exactly right. And you know what? Look, I mean, there are people who adhere to the Ilhan Omar, Tucker Carlson axis of ideological extremism, and their arguments are without rational substance. There's just no question about this. I want to add a few more things that I think it's important that people understand. Donald Trump went so much further than I suspect either Mark or definitely I wanted him to in providing opportunities to the Iranians to get out from under this. Okay? They not only did he send Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff repeatedly to meet with these liars. Not only did they go back and meet with them repeatedly, even after the Iranians failed to offer up serious concessions, but the United States reportedly offered the Iranians not just a small enrichment capacity for medical enrichment, which was a terrible idea, but in addition offered them a free lifetime supply of quote-unquote enriched uranium necessary for their quote-unquote peaceful nuclear program. The Iranians, Donald Trump is not going to be president for more than another 3 years, okay? The Iranians couldn't even see that as an opportunity to get out from under one of the largest military buildups the U.S. has conducted since the Iraq War. The Iranians couldn't even do that. They brought this on themselves because they would not move an inch. And do not listen to their lobbyists, some paid and undeclared in Washington, D.C., who are saying that the Iranians offered a lot. The Iranians offered precisely nothing. They brought this war on themselves. They were the fools because, these guys are meant to be the best bazaris in the Middle East. Let me just say, they were out negotiated by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Damn.
So I agree with everything you just said, and I want to go back and address something you said about all the people who are criticizing the president in terms of not doing enough for the Iranian people, not having a plan for what comes after. I'm sure they do have actually a lot of planning going on. But I will tell you, we need to put this thing in context. So Donald Trump came into office in the wake of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, where the tolerance for and desire for American boots on the ground in foreign wars has basically gone to zero in this country, right? And it's a very similar situation to what Ronald Reagan inherited after when he came into office in 1980 in the wake of the Vietnam War, where there was no desire among the American people to send American troops to fight in distant lands. And Reagan had to forge a new way of leadership. He rejected isolationism. He knew that we had to confront Soviet communism. So he forged the Reagan Doctrine, which was a strategy that involved supporting freedom fighters around the world to fight their own wars and roll back Soviet advances. And we would provide them with weapons and training and all the rest, right? He found a new way to lead in an era when there was no desire for boots on the ground. Donald Trump comes into office, and he has a choice in the wake of Afghanistan and Iraq, which is we can either retreat into isolationism and not lead, or we can find a new way to lead that doesn't involve putting American boots on the ground everywhere. And he is forging a Trump doctrine, which is that we will use every coercive tool in our from diplomacy, negotiations, tariffs, sanctions, to coerce our adversaries into bending to our will. And if they refuse to bend to our will, then we will launch decapitation strikes and leave what happens onto the ground to the people of those countries. And that's what we've done to some extent in Venezuela. That's what we're doing to now in Iran. And, some people are saying, well, why are we not making sure that a democratic government is installed in Venezuela? I think we'll get there at some point, right? But we didn't go into Venezuela like George H.W. Bush went into Panama, right? With large ground forces to occupy the country. We are not going to go into Iran with a massive pull Paul Bremer out of retirement and a coalition provisional authority and an occupation force. Trump said in his address, and I loved how much he talked about freedom in his speeches this weekend. It was very Reagan-esque. But he said to the Iranian people, I said help is on the way. I've delivered on that promise. Now it's up to you. And it's up to the Iranian people to rise up once the bombs stop dropping and it's safe to come out. It's up to the Iranian people to rise up and take their country back. And the alternative to that is not doing it the old way. It's doing nothing. And so I think we're watching it real time unfolding a new Trump doctrine, which is a corollary to the Reagan doctrine, which is a new way of leading in an era when no one wants to send American troops to get bogged down in 20-year wars in foreign lands. And I think we need to give the president a lot of running room, a lot of space. We have to advise him well, give him good ideas and suggestions on how to make that successful. But it's really important that it succeed. Because the alternative, if it failed, would be for the isolationists to say, see, that didn't work either. And, the best solution for us is to just not worry about these problems, to retreat behind Fortress America. And Trump is the one who is forging a new way to lead in this era. And I think we need to support what he's trying to do.
Well, look, I do support it. I think he makes hard decisions. I think he doesn't dither. I really appreciate it. I was nervous. We all were a little nervous, and I want to see follow through. And I agree with you. We don't want to see a Venezuela. It's very important to understand just how ideologically dangerous these guys are. And you rightly point out, Mark, during our interview, that it's not just that these guys are ideologically dangerous on the nuclear weapons, on the missiles, on their attitude towards their neighbors, on the Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, on Israel, on Europe, on America, on, the great Satan and the little Satan. They're also very dangerous when it comes to Sunni extremism. The current head of Al-Qaeda is in Iran, Saif al-Adil. I hope he's got a nice giant hot bullseye on his back as well, because while we're busy killing, Mrs. Khamenei, which she died this morning of her injuries from last week, we should be killing the head of Al-Qaeda. So I agree with you entirely. These are very dangerous people, and we cannot trust one of them to be a steward, a Delcy Rodriguez, if you will, toward the future. We don't have, Venezuela is a hop, skip, and a jump away from us. We do not want to maintain 2 carrier battle groups in the Middle East in order to ensure that whoever takes over Iran next is going to behave properly. We want the Iranian people to rise up and choose exactly who should lead them, and that leader must be a 180-degree opposite of the current regime. So, that's what we need. Now is not that moment, though. And that's why, folks are going to say, oh, well, why don't you talk about what's next, Danny? Why don't you tell us what's coming, Mark? And the answer is because the now is not that moment. The president has told the Iranian people, stay home, right? The Israelis have texted. They have hacked into the Iranian notification systems, and they have told people, stay home. Okay, now is not the time. We are going to set the stage for you. It will be set. Then it will be your moment. But now, don't get in the way of artillery. Don't get in the way of bombs. Don't get in the way of danger. Wait at home. And so I'm waiting. What are the signs I'm looking for? I'm looking for Iranian leaders to start leaving. I'm looking for the ones that are still alive. Bye, Ahmadinejad. We'll miss you so much. Bye, Ayatollah Khamenei. Bye, Ayatollah Khamenei's successor, who reportedly was also killed in recent hours. I'm waiting for people to take their bank accounts and start looking for places to go. That's a sign that the regime is starting to collapse. I'm looking for their missile launchers to stop launching. I'm looking for people to stop trying to kill Iranian citizens in the streets. Those are the signs that we're waiting for, that the political moment has begun. We are still in the midst of a military moment. And I want to add one more thing, Mark, that I don't know if you saw while we were talking. They did a press conference at the General Kane, and Secretary Hegseth did a press conference, and Hegseth was asked to rule out boots on the ground, and he said, "I'm not ruling out anything."
Yep.
And again, that is not so much that we want to have boots on the ground to rule Iran. It is to go in, for example, to secure their nuclear material, which is critically important. And that's what we're talking about with our guest today, for people who want a deep dive into just what was going on and how dangerous it was.
Excellent. Well, let's go to our guest. And in the outro, I want to just, for those who are going to stick around for the whole thing, I want to dive into this Al Qaeda angle a little bit, because you're going to hear some interesting things on the conversation about this.
Yep. So David Albright's been with us before, most recently after the 12-Day War. He is the source par excellence about the Iranian nuclear program. He's the founder and the president of what on Twitter, X, is called the Good ISIS. It's the Institute for Science and International Security in Washington, D.C. He's written more than you can begin to imagine on secret nuclear weapons programs around the world. He's worked with the IAEA, analyzing other programs. He is a physicist. He has more credentials than I have time to recite to you. But on top of everything else, he is just an outstanding, dispassionate scientist on these questions. You're going to love the interview.
Here's our interview. Well, David, welcome back to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Well, we had you on after Operation Midnight Hammer, where we had obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, to use the president's term, and here we are back in the skies over Tehran, flying missions, obliterating it again, and much more than that. Just give it, we're recording this on Monday. We're about 57 hours into Operation Epic Fury, which has the same acronym as Operation Enduring Freedom, OEF, which is kind of interesting. But tell us your assessment. Where do you see things right now?
Well, I think I see mostly attacks on the missile launching or offensive missile program in Iran, and then command and control. And they know, as far as we can tell, we're using satellite imagery every day to look. No nuclear site's been struck, but I wouldn't necessarily expect that this early. I mean, the nuclear sites that are important are pretty fortified. Some, or one particularly, is deeply underground. So I think we fully expect these sites to be attacked, or would view the operation as failing on this, accomplishing the mission of really obliterating the nuclear weapons program. But so far, we have not seen any attacks. And some of it is good. I mean, we don't want the United States to attack the Bushehr nuclear power reactor or the Tehran research reactor. I mean, these could have radiological consequences. And like in the June war, I would assume the U.S. and Israel have told Russia, we will not attack the Bushehr nuclear power reactor.
So let's talk a little bit about the Iranian nuclear program, because I agree. Look, in any operation that is going to be over multiple days, where we and our allies have aircraft and Iran is attacking the region, the missile sites have to be the first priority. There's no question. This is not a short term or a limited scope operation, as best we understand from what the president has said and the buildup in the region. So let's talk a little bit about the Iranian nuclear program, because Americans, insofar as they've been paying attention, they know about Bushehr, they know about Fordow, because that was the heavily reinforced mountain site where they had their nuclear cascade. They know about Natanz, but there are some other things going on as well. So give us a sort of a tour d'horizon of the Iranian nuclear program.
Yeah, and before the war in June, I mean, it was in two parcels. One is the parcel to create highly enriched uranium for potential use in a bomb, and as you know, they could make weapon grade uranium in a matter of days, sufficient for a bomb. They also had a number of sites in the other parcel to make the bomb itself. And that's harder to understand because they're smaller and more secretive than, let's say, Fordow or Natanz. But nonetheless, they were preparing to be able to build a bomb pretty quickly within months. Israel and the United States eliminated the main enrichment sites, as you just mentioned, Fordow and Natanz. And Israel destroyed important parts of the nuclear weaponization production infrastructure. We don't think they destroyed it all, but in many cases it's a linear process. You start at A, then you make something that goes to B, that is then modified into C, for example, the final weapon grade uranium bomb component. And they took out let's say they took out B. And so you can't get from A to C then. And they did that across several components of the nuclear weapon, and they also destroyed some of the expertise by killing some key, we would call them Iranian Oppenheimers. Now, since then, the question has been what remains. And what we've seen is some salvaging operations and potentially rebuilding operations, reconstituting operations on the nuclear weaponization side, but minimal. We see that they're carefully protecting the remaining stocks of highly enriched uranium, which were not destroyed in the June war. The assessment by the International Atomic Energy Agency is much, if not all, I'm almost quoting Director General Grossi, of the enriched uranium, highly enriched uranium, is in an Esfahan mountain complex that's part of the Esfahan nuclear site. And through satellite imagery over the months, we saw that tunnel entrances had been heavily damaged by Tomahawk missiles. We think maybe some Earth penetrator warheads had been put on the Tomahawks, and that Iran was opening the tunnel entrance. And one in particularly, we think they drove vehicles in. So we don't know what they've done, but they were trying to gain access to some of these stocks of highly enriched uranium. Director General Grossi said this morning in a press conference, we hope they haven't moved any. So we remain uncertain collectively what exactly Iran's done with these highly enriched uranium stocks.
So we don't know exactly where they've put some of their uranium stocks, but you and your organization have put out a number of reports that, to me at least, were reasonably alarming about what Iranian activities were going on, not just at the Parchin site that is familiar to us, which is the one where they had done some explosives and detonation work over the years, but also at this site called Al-Nur, and then a couple of other sites. Can you just give people a sense of what the Iranians appeared to be doing in order, first of all, to harden and to reconstitute?
What we see is, and again, it's limited by our resources and limitations of satellite imagery, and then the other information to the extent we can gather it from governments, is that Iran is recovering things. If unfortunately you bomb a facility that's involved in making weapon-grade uranium cores, some of the things involved are pretty big and heavy and pretty robust. And so were they destroyed or just damaged? And so, like an example would be what's called a vacuum induction furnace. Absolutely necessary to melt uranium, and particularly weapon-grade uranium, and then process it down the line into a final shape. So that would be, and again, we don't know if that was hit. We know the site where that furnace likely was, but was it recovered? And Iran would have a hard time buying another one internationally, and the ones they would make would probably be pretty low quality. So we have uncertainty there, but they're trying. Is what we see, is they have not given up their ambition to build nuclear weapons, and that becomes very apparent when you look at this imagery. And then you add it. Iran refuses to let the IAEA inspect the enriched uranium stocks, which is a requirement of the Safeguards Agreement and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I think when President Trump, Secretary Hegseth say that the program is being reconstituted, I wouldn't perhaps go that far, but the evidence supports that they have not given up their ambition and that it remains a threat.
So President Trump, launched Operation Midnight Hammer and did significant damage to a number of facilities and warned the Iranians not to try and recover what was damaged. And they were doing it. Why are they? And then, they saw this armada, which was probably the largest military armada ever assembled, in the history of the world, coming at their country. And they still wouldn't just capitulate and give up and say, no, we're fine. No enrichment. No, that we're willing to do this. Why are they so obstinate in the face of so much military pressure to pursue this weapon system?
Well, let me just focus on the enrichment. I mean, the June War, and it was collectively the United States and Israel, destroyed their gas centrifuge program. I mean, they cannot produce the feed material anymore for a centrifuge program. The facilities to make centrifuges were destroyed. 22,000 centrifuges were either destroyed or put out of operation and probably be hard to recover. And so you have a program that no longer really exists, but it has its remnants, and including as we've discussed, the enriched uranium. It also may have some centrifuges it built but didn't deploy. And they're not going to be making low enriched uranium for nuclear power reactors in this decade or the next. And so they're still going to be buying it. And so why won't they give up enrichment? And because they don't need it. They claim they don't want nuclear weapons. And the other reason that we're seeing emerge, and we have Iranians on the staff, and we monitor the press, is that they're somehow, they think it's a slippery slope. Again, it was Khamenei mainly and his close advisors who are no longer with us, but that if they give in on this to the United States, then they'll have to give in on missiles and proxies, and pretty soon their regime will collapse. So it's kind of a mindset that any concession will lead to more, and therefore they can't do it. And now it's irrational, but it's their irrationality. And then the other part is you have to worry, and this is our concern, is that they continue to harbor nuclear weapons ambitions. The enriched uranium is kind of money in the bank. I mean, it's effectively a full year's worth of production from the pre-June enrichment program. And most of it is in the form of 60% enriched uranium. Well over half of this money is in the form of 60% enriched uranium, which can be turned into weapon-grade uranium very quickly, even with just 300-400 centrifuges. And so they have this, in a sense, this deposit in a bank, and they don't want to give it up. And
why didn't we take that out?
They plan to use it.
Why didn't we take that out in June, David?
Well, I was in meetings in Israel 2-3 years ago, and this came up. I mean, of course, anybody planning strikes, and we were not planning strikes, but wanting to know what would be struck, certainly I raised this issue. And there's a chance that maybe the highly enriched uranium has been what we call spiked through some clandestine operation. Think of what they did to the pagers against Hezbollah. But it's harder to spike this because of criticality concerns. You only put about 25 kilograms in any one container, and that's just so you have many containers of this, and it's at multiple sites, mostly at Esfahan, but very very dangerous material. You just don't open a valve and stick something in. If you release the uranium hexafluoride into the atmosphere, it rapidly reacts, and if you breathe it, not very much can kill you. So it's hard to get it into these containers. But that's a possibility, that we're worried about something that when Iran goes to enrich is going to break the spiking would cause the centrifuges to crash once they introduced it into the centrifuge. But we don't know. And I think it was just an omission. And if they didn't spike it, it was a mistake not to more carefully plan how to take out the enriched uranium, and take out in the sense of destroy it. And I think that has to be a priority for this mission, and I'm worried that it's not.
I have to say, I think none of us have a sense of the sort of scope and breadth, but I have to imagine to myself that given you've had these conversations, these issues, the Israelis pay very close attention to this. I have to imagine to myself that this was something they did plan to do prior to being stopped from continuing their military action, because it's irresponsible not to have. But I really appreciate a point that you made, because it's a point that I try to make about Iran, and that is about their decision-making process. That people like to impose our own sort of thinking and rationalizing on the Iranians. And in fact, the Iranians are like almost any ideological organization, whether it's the National Rifle Association or it's Planned Parenthood, which is that they think most about the thin end of the wedge, right? What can't we agree to? Because that will be the concession that ends everything, right? And I think that's really an important window into how the Iranians make decisions, and it's why they won't make these concessions that seem so normal, easy, rational, right? Why not? Why not just give? Right. I think that's really important. You talked about some of the things that the Iranians have been doing at the existing sites, but we also, I have not had a security clearance in a long time. I have not paid as close attention to the so-called pickaxe mountain activities. And I'm curious about those newer activities. And I'm also curious about your assessment of Iranian scientists, slip of the tongue there with
Freudian
our
slip.
bad guys, Freudian indeed, whether they have the technical know-how anymore. It's a dangerous business to be an Iranian nuclear scientist at this point. What do you think about some of these newer sites, and what do you think about the depth of their expertise?
Let me start with the scientists. I haven't seen any evidence of more scientists being killed, but I saw that their bosses were. So there were two current chairman and former chairman of the SPND, which is the organization that controls the nuclear weaponization. They were killed. Also, Shamkhani. I mean, they had many reasons to kill Shamkhani, but he was one of the spark plugs for the initial nuclear weapons program in the late 90s and early 2000s, and maintained a role in a very senior level continuing that program. And so we think that, last June was sort of going after the Iranian Oppenheimers. This one is again going after their bosses. We'll see if they identify other people in the program and then kill them. I mean, we'll just have to see. One of the things that happened after June is Iran stepped up a lot of security and secrecy around the remaining nuclear scientists. And also, interestingly, we don't see the sort of the traditional nuclear establishment, the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, being targeted. Islami is its head. He comes out of the IRGC. He's definitely aware of the nuclear weapons effort in the past, and he is still alive. So I think they're not going after the traditional nuclear people, including centrifuge people. On the Pickaxe Mountain, the background is Israel blew up a huge advanced centrifuge assembly facility that was nearing completion at Nesfahan in Natanz in 2020. Iran said, well, we're going to rebuild it under a nearby mountain that'll be fairly deeply buried. And they've been working on that for the last 5 years, and they're still not finished. And you can see they're still excavating because they have to bring the dirt out. But they are getting close to being finished, and we've seen trucks going in, closed trucks. The suspicion has been for several years that it could also hold a small enrichment plant. There's no evidence of it. The IAEA has never gone in. They've never received a complete declaration for the facility. And so it's of great concern. It was not attacked in June. It's a good point that the war was suddenly stopped, and maybe Israel was planning more operations. This one, we don't get into it too much, but you have to look for vulnerabilities in the mountain. I mean, on the surface, this one looks a lot harder to destroy than Fordow. It is deeper than Fordow. They've hardened in recent months the tunnel entrances, but U.S. is pretty creative, and there are always vulnerabilities. And if nothing else, you can go in through the front door. And in fact, the Iranians are so worried about that at Esfahan that they buried the tunnel entrance. It's just looks it's buried him completely and leveled him with the surrounding area, the surrounding hillside. So they worry about this. But Esfahan, at Pickaxe, they're continuing construction, and we would think that it's a legitimate target that should be taken out because it could be where they would try to reconstitute uranium enrichment, feeling invulnerable, as they said they were in Fort Al. So we'll see.
So, David, I should have asked you a question. Mark or I should have asked you a question right up front. But you in the course of answering these questions, say the Iranian nuclear weapons program, the Iranian nuclear weapons program. One of the conversations that's happening a great deal now that we are seriously at war again in the Middle East is Iraq. I mean, do the Iranians really have a nuclear weapons program? Isn't this just all, a series of, Zionist concoctions and Republican lies? And isn't this just Iraq all over again? You're a scientist, you keep referring to the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Tell us, well, let me not lead the witness. What do you think?
Well, they're very different situations. And you probably know I was very active in 2001, 2002, 2003, looking at both programs. I looked at the Iraq one and said, we couldn't exclude a small nuclear weapons program. This goes back to 2002. I mean, you have to, scientists, you can't exclude tiny little things, but I felt there was no major program. The evidence put forth by the Bush administration was completely flawed. It was well known among the intelligence people that I know who deal with nuclear intelligence. And it's a great tragedy that point of view dominated on that there was some Iraqi nuclear weapons program based on gas centrifuges. But at the same time, we're looking at Iran and discovering secret enrichment plants, big secret enrichment plants, all kinds of other evidence of secret enrichment. And finally, early 2003, Iran admits to it. But one of the constant problems with Iran has been that they admit to something when they're so caught they have to, and then they hide more. At that time, they were hiding another enrichment plant, which we now know is Fort Al, that was part of a crash nuclear weapons program that was ongoing and large in 2003, and a lot of it was missed by the United States. So it's a very different situations. Now roll forward, Iran faced with U.S. troops in Iraq, faced with no longer worried about Saddam, stopped the program. But their own internal documents for this nuclear weapons program say it continued afterward. And there's been evidence afterward, but it's shifted its purpose. It went from let's build 5 nuclear weapons quickly, which was their ambition, to let's be in a sense prepared to build them if we're given the order. And so that's the nuclear weapons program we've seen for the last several years. And there's been various intelligence community statements that part is picked up. No one has said, except kind of a misguided intelligence assessment that said that it stopped and didn't restart. But even those people have published some things several years ago that said, yeah, but some weapons work did continue. But it's not a structured nuclear weapons program like the Ahmad plan. And from my point of view, that sort of misses the point. It's a different kind of nuclear weapons program that we're facing now, where they don't have an order to build weapons. In 2001, 2000, they got the order to build them. Now they don't have an order to build them, but they've tried to maintain. And the way we see what's going on is they're trying to get back. They're just trying to follow the strategy. Prepare to build nuclear weapons, try to reduce timelines, and now they're just been set back dramatically. And they're just trying to keep that mindset going. And so I think, when people say, "Oh, it's like Iraq," or they say they don't have a structured nuclear weapons program, they're sort of missing the point, missing what's going on, and that limits the options, and you're not properly making sense out of what's going on, and so you don't even understand what's happening. Ask me about it. It's complicated in a way, but it comes up all the time. Do BBC interview, forget how they put it. They're very sensitive about it. They quickly devolve. Oh, this is just Iraq again. But it's in a certain sense a very cynical point of view. Again, I'm not big on military strategy. They really should have attacked Iran in 2003.
I was just about to ask you that.
The nuclear weapons program was, Iraq didn't have much of anything, and
that's the question. Did we go after the wrong country? I mean,
I think
truly,
so.
it seems like at the time we were They were pursuing an actual weapon, not just the capability to build a weapon, right? I mean, they were harboring Al Qaeda, senior Al Qaeda members. They were allowing their country to be used as conduit for weapons and plotting and all the rest of it. Did we go after the wrong country in 2003?
Yeah, I think so. And also look at how they ended this Ahmad. It's called the Ahmad plan. It's their code name. It's sort of logistics plan. It's kind of it's the translation. It's classic nuclear weapons caricatures, but they ended it out of fear of the United States. I mean, there were other reasons. The IA was breathing down their neck, armed with intelligence from the United States and U.S. allies, and so and Saddam was gone. But fundamentally, they were worried about being attacked, and so just the threat of attack got them to kind of put the program underground. Interestingly, they didn't stop building Fordow. It was called Al Gadir, was the plant to make weapon-grade uranium, using low-enriched uranium from Natanz as a starter material, and they never stopped that. And when inspectors went in there in 2009, when it was revealed by Western powers, they looked at the piping, and I talked to 3 of them, and they said this plant was being designed to make weapon-grade uranium. Then they left. When they came back, all the evidence of that, all the piping, the equipment had been stripped out. And when they asked, why did you take out all this piping? They said, we needed to repaint the ceiling and then put in different kind of piping to make low-enriched uranium.
So this Operation Epic Fury is very different than Operation Iraqi Freedom. We're not sending hundreds of thousands of ground troops into Iran. We're not calling Paul Bremer out of retirement and to establish a coalition provisional authority and to govern the country and all the rest of that. What are your concerns? Thank God, exactly. What are your concerns as an expert on the Iranian nuclear program about the custody of that program in the sort of chaotic transition that might happen in the wake of this operation?
Wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal on this with Andrea Stricker, and Andrea initiated it, but it reminded me of this problem and ran into it post-war in Iraq. And again, the Iranian situation is different. We were in Iraq, we were worried about natural uranium, bomb designs, classified centrifuge designs. In Iran, we're worried about a full-blown nuclear power reactor, Bushehr. We're worried about operating research reactors, Tehran research reactor, and we're worried about relatively huge stocks of highly enriched uranium and 20% enriched uranium, and even the low enriched. There's tons of low enriched uranium at Natanz and Esfahan, and so there's some very dangerous nuclear assets there. And we wrote the op-ed a couple of weeks ago because we were hoping that if the United States does succeed or over-succeed and creates instability, a reversion to sort of provincial control. I mean, I understand one of the things that Khomeini did was order sort of pre-delegate authority to, I'm calling it provincial commanders and leaders. Does this situation become highly stable? Is there potential for armed insurrection? And I think the primary concern would be the highly enriched uranium stocks at Esfahan. Would some enterprising group decide to dig back in and try to see if they can find some? Would they try to sabotage Bushehr? Or would the chaos lead to safety problems at Bushehr? I mean, it doesn't take much. I mean, we know that from the case in Ukraine with the Zaporizhzhia reactors that they're very dependent for emergencies on kind of thin electric wires. We always think of the wires that take the electricity from the nuclear power plants, but there have to be electrical lines coming in that would run the pumps to cool the reactor when it's shut down, because there's so much heat in the fission generated by the fission products that it can melt the fuel and cause a catastrophic meltdown. And so we know from internal documents, we studied the Bushehr nuclear reactor on a safety question. They've had fires in these emergency electrical lines. The Regional Electricity Authority is not particularly competent. And if there was total chaos, would those people even be running the regional electrical system? And so you do have to worry that you have to be prepared for what could be a catastrophic accident if it all goes badly.
Yes, so I'm getting flashbacks now to my war on terror days in the Pentagon and in the White House. But I mentioned earlier that there were senior Al Qaeda leaders who were being given sanctuary inside Iran. There still are, as I understand it, Al Qaeda operatives that are in Iran. We sort of think of ISIS as having been decimated. We think of Al Qaeda as having been sort of being a shadow of itself. But I don't think they've given up their objective of obtaining a weapon of mass destruction that they could use against a Western country or against Israel. In the chaos, is there a danger that, and again, they don't need a nuclear weapon. If they can get highly enriched uranium, they could create a dirty bomb. There's lots of ways that they could use what exists in Iran today. Is there a danger that as the regime collapses and there's chaos on the ground, that they could obtain the components for a dirty bomb, ultimately for a weapon of mass destruction, that these could fall into terrorist hands?
I mean, there's a lot of radiological sources in Iran, not a lot, but many, and those could be grabbed and used in a dirty bomb potentially. I mean, but I think on the nuclear weapon, I mean, from a point of view, the good ISIS which is very dedicated against the bad ISIS, they lack the ability to sort of the knowledge and experience to the weaponization side. We know that Al Qaeda was working on some of that in a rudimentary way in Afghanistan before the war there, before the U.S. invasion. And so there's very valuable information in the Iranian system. And that if they were determined, they could try to identify people. Those people may be more than willing to help in a chaotic situation. They may be more than willing to trade nuclear weapons design information, or more importantly, initiation of a nuclear weapon. How do you get the thing to detonate? So they're not so worried about the design, but how do you get it to detonate? And that's where they really lack knowledge and experience. And so they may look for opportunities to recruit some people using sums of money and help getting out. I mean, I worked on a case in Iraq. I mean, before the war, we were very depressed because we knew that it was all just motivated by false claims on nuclear, and we were completely powerless to do anything about it, and always had been. It was a very humbling experience that how little influence we have with governments, including our own. But we decided, well, let's go find some former nuclear people and see if we can find classified information. And I was able to connect with one who had kept all the gas centrifuge classified information in some parts. So it was kind of the crown jewels of the gas centrifuge program. And I was able to, and I knew him before the war, and able to trade him coming to the United States with his family for turning over that information to the CIA. And it was difficult because they didn't want to bring out his whole family, and it was actually quite an ugly situation I've never even talked about publicly, and probably shouldn't now. But we had to use what influence we did to get the CIA to fulfill its commitments to bring out his family and himself. That could be done by Al-Qaeda with scientists in Iran. I mean, all it took was, scientists wanting to make a trade and having vital information. And Al-Qaeda in chaos, one could see that we saw in Iraq. In fact, I got a call from a embedded journalist during the march to Baghdad. They reached the Tuatha nuclear site, and he called me and said, I mean, here I am. We don't know what this is. The Army people didn't know what it was, and it was the main nuclear site, and they had large stocks of uranium, and the storage area had been looted, but fortunately they wanted the blue barrels holding the yellow cake to store water rather than the yellow cake itself, and so they dumped that on the ground. But there again, there was just no security at the Tuatha nuclear site in the chaos of war, and that could happen at Esfahan, and then potentially people could drill back in. And so that's why we want the United States to be aware of this. It was not aware of it in Iraq. I mean, even all the talk of WMD, looking for centrifuge plants, the atomic bomb, and they didn't do the basic work of thinking about securing the nuclear facilities and assets. So we hope it needs to be done in the case of Iran, because it looks like this military campaign is going to go on for potentially weeks, and Iranian forces could lose the will to defend or secure nuclear sites, which are largely destroyed. Esfahan is just largely destroyed, and they can rationalize, why should I stay here when my family can't find food and shelter, or what, not shelter, but is just struggling to survive.
No, listen, you make a really important point, and it's not, by the way, it's not just nuclear material, although that's the stuff that makes you the most afraid. We had the same problem with weapons depots in Iraq, where people, there were weapons depots that weren't secured. You do not want regime stalwarts going and using those in the aftermath for some sort of insurgency either. That's why it's so important that there actually is an intelligent political aftermath. You can't allow Iran to devolve into chaos, and this is why people say no, no, no. We only have military objectives, and the answer is actually our military objectives have political components to them as well, and one of those has to be securing a lot of this with responsible governance and leadership that ensures that there aren't perverse incentives. I want to ask you another hard question. I asked you the Iraq question, which was a hard one. And I want to ask you about the JCPOA. Okay, because of course we keep hearing from what I would rudely call Obama retreads that had Donald Trump not ripped up the JCPOA, we would not need to be here because the Iranian program was contained. What's an honest and fair assessment?
Well, I think it's known generally. I worked informally with the Trump administration, with the National Security Council, to create a fix for the deal. It was largely motivated by Senator Corker, who at the time was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it recognized that by 2020, 2025, let's say 2025, all limits were essentially off in a real way, in the sense they could build as many centrifuges as they wanted. They were still limited on enriched uranium. So if in the most positive way, it was a time-bound agreement. And so we would be facing what we're facing today, just roll forward a couple of years. And I think even Biden people recognized it, that's why he wanted a longer, stronger deal. And that he quickly gave that up and didn't do anything. I had a former administration official tell me that they really had no Iran policy for 3 years. So they had an initial one, and then they just really did nothing essentially except go through the motions. So I think
that's not only did they not have an Iran policy, neither did our European friends, the French, the Germans, the Brits. They didn't have an Iran policy either. We just sort of all threw up our hands and said,
yeah. And so I think the sense is that, it was an agreement that just advantaged Iran and did not, and it's in line with the Iranian strategy: build up your capabilities, shorten your timelines, and so you limit them in one way, then they try to find a way around it. And and even things like the Iraq reactor, everyone thought, oh, the Iraq reactor is going to be converted. The Chinese and British and Americans will come up with a new design. We'll take out the chondria that filled with natural uranium that great to make weapon grade plutonium. We'll put in a enriched uranium and limit the number of fuel tubes where you can put in the fuel, so you can't run it with natural uranium. After Trump withdrew, the head of, I guess he was then head of the Atomic Energy Agency, said, oh, we didn't tell them, but we had managed to buy more tubes so we could create a duplicate of the original. It's called the Calandria. And it said, well, we didn't know, how long is this deal going to last? We wanted to be able to recover quickly. So here, they just blatantly cheated, and those kind of things were suspected, but it was hard to prove them until after the JCPOA. There was another case we thought they had advanced centrifuges they'd made and hidden away, and the deal did not create a baseline. It didn't say, okay, we want to know how many you made. It's not enough to know how many you deployed. Well, we think one of the surges post 2021 in advanced centrifuges was taking those out of a secret storage and putting them in Natanz and Natanz. So it was 1,200 or so advanced centrifuges, and so the deal had some very deep flaws. But we were at the time trying to think, okay, let's make sure there's a new deal. At a 10-year mark, and if not, then all the sanctions would snap back. And the idea was to do it legislatively, and it could have been done sooner. I mean, there was concern that this was just not fast enough, and finally Trump decided it definitely not fast enough, and it's best just to leave the deal, and so the buildup started earlier.
Going back to this, because now as we've been talking, I just looked up that in 2023, the Biden administration confirmed that Saif al-Adel, the successor of Ayman Zawahiri, was in Iran. So the leader, Al-Qaeda, is actually based in Iran right now, the top leadership of Al-Qaeda. And Danny made the point about not just nuclear weapons, but other weapons deposed. What about chemical weapons? So does Iran have a chemical weapon stockpile of any kind? I mean, what other stuff is floating out there that in the chaos that Al-Qaeda might be able to get hold of if we don't manage this properly?
Yeah, and I don't know. Our lane on the chemical has to do with what you may put on Iran may give to proxies to put on drones, and it has to do with pharmaceutical-based agents. So, where you could take some, and Iran did
biological weapons, in other words.
No, well, aerosol phenol.
Oh, I see.
And it's well recognized. It's very deadly, and so it's not going to kill a lot of people, but it could kill several or tens of people who were victimized by a drone attack where it's aerosol. And Iran did experiments on aerosoling these pharmaceutical PBAs, let me call it. But in our work, we hear that they have stocks of chemical weapons, but we don't know the truth of it. But it's another concern. And in the Iraq case, I guess the view was initially they had lots of chemical weapons. Then it was, I think our assessment at the end was they had no deliverable chemical weapons. And in fact, that was true. They had chemical weapons hidden away. That fact, as you probably know, was kept secret by the U.S. because they were worried about unguarded stocks that terrorists could get their hands on or insurgents could get their hands on. And still the chemical weapon itself would be quite deadly, even if it can't be delivered in a conventional manner. But in an unconventional manner, it could be. So I think it's something to keep in mind in Iran.
Exit question from me, David, and we've taken so much of your time, and I know you're in demand right now as well. What do we need to see? We need to see what you've outlined, which is what police might call a chain of custody, right? We need to see careful chain of custody. We need to see attention to not just the missiles, not just the nuclear, but other WMD elements. What am I leaving out? What else needs to be part of the Trump administration's thinking, the Israelis' thinking as well, once they begin to wrap up military operations?
Well, I think I agree completely with your earlier point that the goal has to try to be some kind of stable government that can be in control of the situation. I mean, I'm not sure we can accept another dictatorship with just new tyrants in place that are ideologically driven. But I think we have to strive for something better. But I think one thing that is left out is and it's hard, but the nuclear scientists and scientists looking at advanced weapons, drones, missiles, we need to get a better sense of how to draw them in to a new regime so they don't leak to enemies either in revenge or just to see as an opportunity to make money. And I don't think much thought's been given to that. I mean, the Israelis mostly focus on how to kill them and deter them and how to get informants. But I don't think they're really thinking about that this is a group, as it was in the Soviet Union, could turn out to be very dangerous. And
as it was after World War II. And the Israelis knew that.
Yeah, and so this group could be highly motivated to help our enemies, including terrorists. So I think that needs to be done. Just as again, we're not military planners. We're not advocating military strikes. But I think they're not showing. The U.S. and Israel need to show that they're going after and succeeding in limiting the remaining parts of the dangerous nuclear program, and particularly the enriched uranium stocks. Some of the weaponization activities that we see appear to be being reconstituted before the war, and just make sure that we're not sitting here 3 months from now wondering who did Iran scarf off, 50 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium and has created a small enrichment plant to turn it into weapon grade.
My exit question, and you may have just answered it, but if you were brought into President Trump's office in Mar-a-Lago or in the Oval Office right now and had 5 minutes to make a case to him, what's the most important message you would have for the president right now as he carries out this operation?
Well, I'm biased, obviously. I'm sort of highly specialized person, scientist. You say you want to end the nuclear weapons program and make sure Iran doesn't build one. Well, then do that and focus on Pickaxe Mountain, Esfahan mountain site, and recruiting key scientists that have insight into the program to help provide a guide to where any hidden assets are. And the United States can offer money and safety. I mean, it was interesting to me in the Iraq case. Coming to the United States was really highly valued by people who understood in June of 2003 that something bad was going to happen, and they wanted out, and they were willing to trade it. So I think recruiting those people is important to help you understand what's going on. And the U.S. should do it because, Israel scares people because they will assassinate or kill people so quickly.
Thank you, David. As usual, I just learn a lot and really appreciate a temperate, rational, knowledgeable, thoughtful approach. So that's always what you offer. I'm
Thank you.
really
It's always a
grateful.
joy. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, Danny. So as this conversation unfolded, I've grown increasingly concerned about the Al Qaeda angle. I remembered from this is all sorts of chips in my brain that had been dormant for years about the Al Qaeda presence in Iran were going off. And as we were talking, I looked up, and Saif al-Adel, the successor to Ayman Zawahiri, who was the successor to Bin Laden, so the new Bin Laden, is sitting in Tehran right now. And we know that the Iranian regime, amongst its many crimes, allowed the leadership of Al Qaeda, including bin Laden's son and other people, to live and operate inside Tehran, to move money, move operatives, plot attacks from a sanctuary. Iran, as we know from Hamas, is perfectly happy to deal with Sunni extremists and use them to its advantage, right?
Absolutely.
So what is the number one goal that Al Qaeda had from Bin Laden all the way through today? It's to get its hands on weapons of mass destruction it can use against the West, to get chemical weapons, to get dirty bomb, ultimately a nuclear weapon. All of that stuff is going to be floating around Iran right now. And there are Al Qaeda operatives there in the country that could see this as a moment of opportunity to get their hands on radiological materials that they could use against us. So I think it's super important. I think you're absolutely right. So our target list should include the Al Qaeda leaders who are in Tehran, and we've got to make sure that we have a plan in place to make sure that stuff doesn't squirt out in any way, shape, or form in a way that terrorists could get their hands on this, because that would be a huge backfire if Al Qaeda were able to get its hands on radiological, chemical, biological materials in the Iranian arsenal as the Iranian regime collapses.
And Mark, I want to also talk about just sort of the impact that this has. If in fact the president has a wide aperture. And we're obviously working with the Israelis as well. The Israelis also have a wide aperture. They also care a great deal about Sunni extremists. After all, despite Iran's backing, Hamas is a Sunni group, not a Shia group. But it's vitally important that they have that wide aperture. And there's another reason for this. The reason is because when you take out the Godfather, it is a lesson to everybody. Do not try this. One of the things that I've heard in recent weeks from colleagues of ours who pay very close attention is that as the Iranians have encountered difficulties, let's say, had cash flow problems, been between jobs, doing some consulting, as the Iranians have been doing some consulting and not supporting some of their terrorist friends, particularly Hezbollah, the Turks have stepped in. The Erdogan government has stepped in to backfill, because the Erdogan government in Ankara, our NATO allies, I should add, has seen Iran's fall as an opportunity for itself to step in and reconstitute the Ottoman Empire in ways that the Iranians have tried to reconstitute the Persian Empire. And what I want our
Can I
friend
just stop you
Erdogan.
for a second, Danny? So
Yes.
Putin is trying to reconstitute the Soviet Russian Empire. Erdogan is trying to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. Iran is trying to reconstitute the Persian Empire. Is there anybody anywhere in the world that's not trying to reconstitute an ancient empire? I mean,
I am trying to reconstitute my 20s every
the Danny
day.
Pletka Empire.
The Danny Pletka Empire of Youth. But look, this is the problem: is that there's a mythology around the greatness of these things, and I have actually a little asterisk that our listeners will enjoy. But you know what I want Erdogan to understand is Iran and the Iranian regime paid the ultimate price for, forgive my language, folks, fucking around with the United States and with our allies. The idea that Erdogan should now neatly step in and start backing Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and others is crazy. Don't do that, dude. That will be a big mistake. And if you think Donald Trump loves you, you are wrong. He will not put up with that, and neither will the Israelis.
Before you read that, one of our broadcasting challenges, information ops challenges in this operation is how to translate FAFO into Persian.
Exactly. That was my bad language.
Fuck around and find out in Persian. I'd like to know.
Asking for a friend. My little asterisk for folks that are interested is that I was with I won't name what country, but a country that knows whereof it speaks on this matter. I was with an Arab leader, a very, very senior Arab leader, very recently, and he mentioned the Ottoman Empire. And he said, and said, Erdogan may think that he can reconstitute the so-called Ottoman Empire. He said, let me tell you what that was. That wasn't an empire. That was the Turkish colonial occupation of Arab land. That was no empire. And I thought to myself, I can't wait to hear you say that publicly.
Hey,
so anyway.
But before we go, one of the top things that we've completely failed to discuss here is what the hell with our European allies? You know, you mentioned NATO.
Absolutely.
Good God. You know, the British, you know, they're all running around with their hair in a head. Oh, Donald Trump has threatened to invade Greenland. He's destroying the NATO alliance, blah, 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 blah. You know what's destroying the NATO alliance? When our number one ally in Europe, Great Britain, doesn't let us use Diego Garcia to take out the Iranian regime. When the French and the Germans, Germany's doing better lately, you know, some of these countries come out and say, well, we have nothing to do with this, and we're not helping, and we're not participating. You know what? What a useless bunch of tools. These
Amen.
You are making the case for every critic of NATO, you know, to saying that these people are a waste of space. You know, where NATO is a useless organization, because when I looked at that, I was just in Cambridge, England, at a conference with conservatives. You know, the reform and conservative people who are trying to, you know, take back their country from Keir Starmer, and it was all about the special relationship. And then I learned that was where I learned that the British were not going to let us use Diego Garcia, and I'm sitting here thinking they should be sending fighter jets with us to carry out this mission, where they should be offering ways to help, and they're denying us Diego Garcia, and they finally backed down from that. You know, I was reminded the other day of Macron, who's been, you know, petulant about this thing. Norman Schwarzkopf famously said, going to war without France is like going hunting without an accordion.
I forgot that line.
But, you know, France, what the hell are you? Germany, where the hell are you? Where are our NATO allies in this operation? And you know, if you don't want to help, you know, don't get in the way.
Exactly.
I'm absolutely disgusted by Europe's reaction to this whole thing. You know, and by the way, where were those?
Let me add the
Iranian missiles. What's the range of Iranian missiles? They can't reach us, but they're building missiles to reach Europe. You know.
Yeah, they can't reach us yet, but
They're working on it.
they're working on it. Hey, I wanna. Yes, I am grossed out by European allies, but let me just read this tweet. I condemn the military escalation in the Middle East today. The strikes by the U.S. and Israel against Iran and subsequent attacks undermine international security. These actions carry the risk of igniting a chain of events no one can control in the most volatile region of the world. Lasting peace can only be achieved through peaceful means. Guess who that was? Antonio Guterres, that worthless piece of crap.
Yes. Well, I mean, we all knew the United Nations was a worthless piece of crap. We didn't quite realize how many of our European allies were worthless pieces of crap. And
This is certainly the Danny and Mark Unleashed episode, but
I'm just
hey,
so angry about it. It's
I am
like
too.
No,
you're right. You're right.
It's just, and you know what? And I will say it here. They have allowed their nations to be invaded by mass immigration, and now they're afraid of those populations. It's true. It is absolutely true.
Well, I will say this, Mark. They sucked before they allowed themselves to be.
Oh, they were weak characters before, but no doubt. I mean, you go back to P.G. O'Rourke's, famous, what was it that we called Attack of the Euroweenies or something like that, back during the Cold War. But they were always weak and afraid of themselves. But now they're afraid of their own populations.
Yeah, well, this is the problem in Australia
it's a
too.
huge problem. You go into London today, and you see, the people marching with Hamas flags and all the rest of it. They're afraid of their own population's reaction if they were to support us.
Yeah, I know they are. No, you're right. Listen, that's what the demonstrations are.
Huge problem. So all these people saying, "Oh, we're wrong to criticize them for the problems of mass immigration," tell me that wasn't a factor in your decision to say we have nothing to do with this. Oh, we weren't involved. Please don't march on Parliament. Please don't march on Parliament. We had nothing to do with it. We're not even letting him use Diego Garcia. Screw you. Special relationship is dead.
Let me end on a light note. I saw a really hilarious.
We should have led with this.
Let me end on a light note and say I saw this hilarious meme over the weekend, and it was the Israelis and Macron. So it's the Israelis, and they turn to Macron and they say, "We need your help with Iran," and Macron says, "Absolutely not. I will not help you with this illegal war." And the Israelis are like, "No. We need you to tell the Iranians how to surrender."
On that note, I gotta run.
We gotta go. Take care, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Let us know any questions you have, anything you'd like us to do, and we'll see you soon.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.